In the city of Turin, Italy, during the 19th century, there were two forces vying for the attention of the beaten-down worker class: masonic sects who promoted Marxist class struggle ideology, and Saint John Bosco, who opposed these sects in peaceful movements based on Catholic charity and love of order in society. Don Bosco was making so much headway with his mutual aid society that the Masons knew he had to be stopped, even if it was by murderous attempts on his life.
The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
A tavern known as the Giardiniera, or Gardener, stood across from the door to Valdocco's church, separated from the churchyard by a wall. The tavern was the refuge of thieves, the haunt of vagrants, gamblers, drunkards, traveling musicians, bear tamers. The idlers of all kinds continually gathered there, and so did the members of the then nascent liberal workers' societies, whose main headquarters were in a basement in the alley of Santa Maria. The secret heads of the society were some Protestants and certain gentlemen of very bad behavior. In previous years, even when the Giardiniera's former patrons caused a disturbance, they were not expressly hostile against the oratory. But this year, the rowdies evidently wanted to annoy Don Bosco and offend him with trivial swearing during church services. The troublemakers paid other scoundrels to make the oratory feel their anger. Don Bosco saw the need to remove that army of the devil, but it wasn't an easy task. The expense of fighting against them was huge, and offending that rabble was dangerous. They were ready to commit violence rather than allow Don Bosco to occupy a house he considered his domain. Don Bosco experienced several disgusting proofs of this. One day he was called to the sacristy, where some men waited for him, and he thought that they wanted to go to confession. But as soon as he entered, they closed the doors. Then several young men, including Buzzetti and Arnaud, suspected some plot, so they passed into the presbytery, and there they stood eavesdropping and watching through the keyhole of the sacristy door. They heard loud, excited talk from those wicked men who had come to argue with Don Bosco. With a few words, he confounded them, but they began to spout angry vulgarities at him. Don Bosco tried to calm them down, but they became even more heated and drew their knives. At this point, the lurking youths made a noise and broke down the door, and the angry wretches fled through the doorway into the courtyard. In the meantime, among the older ones, boys who belonged to the Mutual Aid Society were deserting the oratory without any reason. One day, two elegantly dressed gentlemen stopped one of the older boys who spoke French. After a cordial conversation, they offered him a large sum of money, about 600 liras, and a promise that they would find him a job if he left the oratory and led away other boys over whom he had great influence. He was indignant at this offer. He answered them, "Don Bosco is my father, and I will not abandon him or betray him for all the gold in the world." Those gentlemen were not offended at this. Instead, they begged him to reflect, and several other times they renewed their offer of money. He always refused. Don Bosco understood then how money had seduced certain unfortunate boys to leave the oratory. Don Bosco decided it was prudent to keep these facts secret to avoid arousing the greed of some boys who were more unstable in virtue. At the same time, he thought it wise to pray and to redouble his vigilance and enticements to keep the boys in the oratory. Don Bosco's workers' society grew in number for several years. Some artists from the city, who were excellent Christians, were admitted to the society so that they might give direction to the novices by their example. In 1856, the society was flourishing. Don Bosco had two serious motives behind his hard work for this institution. He was among those few who understood from the beginning, and he said this 1,000 times, that the revolutionary movement was not a passing whirlwind. Not all the promises made to the people were dishonest, and many responded favorably to the movement's universal living aspirations. They wished to achieve equal rights without class distinctions and sought greater justice and improvement of their fortunes. On the other hand, Don Bosco saw how riches were becoming the monopoly of people who lacked any pity. Employers were imposing unjust contracts regarding both wages and the duration of work, and workers were brutally prevented from observing holy days. These efforts resulted in the workers' loss of religious faith, the misery of families, and adherence instead to subversive teachings. Don Bosco deemed it necessary for the clergy to approach the people. He couldn't expand his mutual aid society to meet the needs of the times. However, he considered raising a large number of almshouses for young artisans, but he foresaw that directing and administering the work, supervising payment records, and distributing relief would be impossible in the long run. He resisted discouragement and progressed toward his goals, but then he had to stop, especially because those who could help didn't support his efforts. Indeed, his efforts became a target of their criticism. He did, however, have the merit of giving many other Catholic workers' associations the first idea and model that they could follow to improve their lot, appease their calls for justice, and thereby remove them from the tyrannical influence of the revolutionaries. The first of the Italian Catholic workers' unions was established in Turin in 1871 at the instigation of a handful of generous young men. Unfortunately, the Masonic secret societies had already made headway among the workers and the established mutual aid societies, which they exploited for their own ends. Those Christian unions grew in number throughout the Piedmont and other parts of Italy, and they had assistance from the Church, which gave great advantage to the Catholic cause and offered great consolation to Don Bosco. Several of these unions proclaimed him their honorary president with certificates and diplomas. The Spirit of the Lord hovered over the world and provided for new needs with new institutions. In Germany, Father Kolping founded a Catholic society of young apprentices who came to number tens of thousands, with branches of their own in many cities. France also set a noble example. Among others, Leo Harmel, known as the father of the worker, became a close friend of Don Bosco's because of their shared sentiments. From these facts, it's clear that Saint John Bosco managed to influence public opinion at the time to have a greater love for the worker in a Catholic sense, while also opposing Masonic, socialist, and communist ideologies. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you'd like to hear about Masonic attempts on Saint John Bosco's life, please click on the videos I put on the screen. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.